Looks good?
We're good. All right. Jonathan Jarecki, thank you for coming on Innato Conversations.
Thanks for having me. I'm super blessed to be the first guest here. I'm excited.
Let's start off with you telling the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm 21 years old. I was raised in a very holistic household. So we were, very centered around the mindset that the body has the innate capacity to heal. And that if you give the body the right environment to do so, then it can do it. And it can heal. And really, it was this mindset that we don't need to rely on the doctors for our own health, that the health of my mom's 4 children and herself can be put in the individual's hands. And so I was raised super health conscious, never really went to the doctor growing up. I tell people all the time, like, my infrared sauna is older than myself. It's 35 years old. So we had that environment, which I'm super blessed to have known about. Because a lot of people, I think, aren't even aware of the fact that the body can heal without pharmaceutical drugs or without doctor intervening into people's lives. So I'm super blessed to have known that, and that sort of led me to where I am today. Around 3 years ago is when I started diving deep. 3-4 years ago is when I started diving deep into the science behind all the practices that my family had growing up. So I, before it was sort of whatever my mom's idea, and I sort of had these really strong opinions and thoughts around health that I wanted a backing behind why I thought these things. So I started diving deep started reading books, started listening to podcasts, started diving deep into the primary literature, and fell in love with it. This is the same time when I, fell in love with just my science classes in high school, and it's around junior, senior year of high school. And then I knew going into college I wanted to study science because I just had this love for it and find it super fascinating. And yeah, so right now I'm in college. I'm an undergrad bio major, neuroscience minor, and just really, my whole goal with life is just to help people on their health journey, because I think it is so incredible what lifestyle interventions can have on people. Not only can we prevent disease, but we can absolutely reverse disease as well. And I think a lot of people don't even think about, I think the first part, preventing disease is a little bit more thought about, but reversing disease is absolutely, possible. If giving the body the right signals, the right environment to do so, it absolutely can. So that's a little bit about my backstory and how I got here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think when you can really build on this fundamental premise, which I'm sure we'll get into, that the body is inherently intelligent, it can really simplify so many things. As opposed to this machine that you have to constantly manipulate. And as we know, you manipulate one part and it has a downstream effect that will have to basically force you to focus on all these other parts, and it is basically nonsense. So yeah, let's get into this first question I have for you. I love how your mind works, and it's very easy to tell that your curiosity is about as deep as pretty much anyone I've ever encountered. I want to know what first got you interested in light and its role in human health.
Yeah, great question. So growing up, we had a great appreciation for diet and exercise, and we did a lot of detoxification protocols and things like that. We didn't have a huge emphasis on light and circadian biology and all that, but I will say my mom definitely had a big focus on getting her children outside, playing outside, getting sunlight. She never put sunscreen on us. So I never had a fear towards the sun, which is a great sort of starting point when I did get into all this light stuff. So I had that background. And then I listened to a podcast that many are familiar with Jack Cruz, Andrew Huberman, and Rick Rubin.
And how long ago was that?
That was probably 3-ish years ago. Yeah.
Wow.
Heard that. And I already knew who Huberman was, didn't really know who Jack was. But I listened to that and my mind was just blown. I think a lot of things I never heard about, a lot of it just went over my head. I've listened to it now 5 or 6 times at this point. Every single time I listen to it, I gain something new that I can learn about. And so a lot of it did go over my head, but I think the complexity that was in it put a desire in me to want to learn more about it. And then thinking about it more logically around light and all that, it is, this sort of foundational health pillar. A lot of people in the health and wellness space, and I was definitely a little bit a part of this, is, once you have exercise and nutrition put in place, you're good.
Calories
no need
in,
to think,
calories out.
Exactly. And no need to think about anything else. That's like a big focus, I think, in the health and wellness space. I think it's moving towards other things, which is great. Especially, I think, you're getting a lot more and more people talking about light, which is awesome. We need more people talking about it. But I think there's so much more to health, and there's so many pillars to health. And I think sunlight is just another pillar to health. I think it's a super, super important one. But it's another pillar to health, right? There's so many. It's just, I never want to say like, all right, this is the most important thing, right? It's this complex system of things that sort of integrate into each other. That is what creates health long term. So I sort of, had that mindset going into it. And I really, once I listened to that podcast, I started diving deep into the literature, started asking questions, started like questioning some stuff that was said in that podcast, looked it up, sure enough, it's true. And I just dove deep, started reading literature. And what I found so fascinating around a few things. One, like I said, a lot of people aren't talking about it. So I think it's an area in the health and wellness space that is sort of this void that can be filled with more voices to talk about it. So that was one thing that was fascinating to me. I always get fascinated by stuff that just is unfamiliar. So, and maybe also things that aren't well established. I think that the research is just coming more and more and more, and we're getting more research around this, but things that aren't like well established, like biophoton research, right? It's so it's not well established at all. We know biophotons exist and that's established and things like that, but why do they exist? What are they doing? In the literature itself, we don't have all those answers. And that really excites me, especially with anything in science. The answers we don't know is what really excites me. The things we know, I get bored about. I want to be, on the forefront of knowledge and stuff. So that was all sort of like a little bit of my framework around it. And then, started reading the literature around sunlight, around the effects of artificial light, and found it simple in the fact that the protocol and the takeaway is super simple, right? It's like, be outside, right? It's a super simple thing to tell people. In terms of like mechanisms, things like that can get a little more complex, especially for like the lay person. But I think it's just this beautiful story that light is, that it just makes sense. For one, it just makes sense of obviously, light is so important for the human body. So from a logistical standpoint and from a logical standpoint, that sort of fit really well with in my brain. But I think getting more on like the science aspect, I loved learning about it, then loved sharing it like on social media, and then getting to share it with my friends. Because I think what's really great about everything with light is that once people start implementing this, there's no going back. One, because they see either a radical transformation in their health, or they just see I think, humans are, and we can talk about this, but like humans are inherently addicted to the sun for a good reason, right? We need sunlight, so our body's gonna have things embedded in it and mechanisms embedded in it to make us addicted to the sun, so we go get in sunlight so we don't be deficient in sunlight. And I think that sort of addiction is what a lot of people get drawn to sunlight. I mean, you see like tanning beds, like people are like addicted to tanning beds. Why? Mm-hmm. Because of the UV wavelengths, and our body craves that. So it's going to try to go get it as much as possible. So I think there's no going back with the sunlight story and the circadian biology and all that. And it just sort of becomes, for me, it has become this innate thing that, all right, I'm not like thinking about when I wake up, I need to go outside. It's just something I do naturally now because it's it's just inherent to the human body. Like we crave like going outside and more. That's just that should be a typical response, right? Now, modern humans are so addicted to their phones and all this stuff and want comfort. So it's hard to get them to feel that inner sort of longing and craving for sunlight. But I think as we get them out in the sunlight more and more, then that just naturally happens. But yeah, so that's sort of a little bit how I got into light. And I think there's so much research coming out that is just so fascinating around these topics that I believe that, I think right now still in the health and wellness world, diet's probably number one. I think in the coming years, once we gain a greater appreciation for how much light affects the human body, it's probably going to be close up to there.
That's a question I had for you. Yeah. We'll get into that.
Yeah.
I was going to touch on a point you made regarding how you can never say there's one thing that is more important than everything else. And I think that goes back to how the human mind works. I think to focus on one part is to look at life as a machine, which is the biggest mistake we can make. We have to understand our body is no separate than nature. Mm-hmm. It's all one system, and manipulating one part is just going to downstream affect the whole system, and we're just going to be chasing constantly, as opposed to looking at it as this one interconnected, intelligent, infinitely intelligent system.
Yeah.
And then also regarding your point with the conditions that allow this innate intelligence to flow, that's really why I started this podcast, because it's easy to say there is this intelligence that is always wanting to express itself fully, that knows how to create health, and you just need to establish the proper conditions for it to express itself.
Yeah.
But then the question is, what actually are the conditions for that? And then that's the deepest rabbit hole of humanity. Sure. It's like the human body is so complex. You have so many factors into actually what these conditions are.
Yeah.
So Innato Conversations, the name of this podcast. Innato is actually just innate in Spanish. So that's really like my motive to start this podcast, is there is this driving intelligence in our body, but in all of nature, in all of God's creation. And the question is, what exactly are the conditions for you to be who you are, and for this innate intelligence to flow and express itself at 100% of its capacity in your vessel? And I love that question. So I love that point. And yeah, I truly believe that there is no more important system or organ system or pillar, like you said. It's all one system. So now I'm curious, you're on this pre-med path.
Yeah.
You're well on your way to becoming a conventional physician.
Yeah.
But you recently changed directions.
Yeah.
Totally a bold move. I have so much respect for you for putting your foot down and sharing with the world your thoughts and your where your heart was leading you.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, one, what led to that decision? And what were your thought processes when you decided to make this transition?
Yeah. So, like I said, I'll go back a little bit to like high school. I was loving my like anatomy classes, loving my science classes. So I know coming into college, I wanted to, at the very least, study biology, and I had a big desire to study neuroscience as well. So coming to college freshman year, I'm sort of, telling myself, I'm going to do bio major, neuroscience minor. That's what I'm still on. And that's what I'm doing. At the school that I'm at, Davidson, there's a ton of, pre-med students. It's a big, just STEM, college. And there's a ton of bio majors, and the vast majority of bio majors are on the pre-med track. So I was surrounded by that, for one. And, starting to think about, do I want to go pre-med, or like, what do I want to do? And that's sort of the thing, you get thrown into the college system, and it's like they're telling you, you gotta know what you're gonna do, and all this, how it all planned out, and all that. So was thinking about it, and I was like, yeah, you know what? I think I want to go pre-med. I want to go into medical school, get an MD, practice practice as an MD, but also still, obviously, I have this mindset of sort of, Eastern philosophies and, functional medicine and holistic, sort of this view of this holistic body, that is the human body. And I knew when I was going to be going into like med school that I would obviously have this sort of rift between my views and the standard medical establishment, but I was okay with that. That's been my whole life. I mean, in high school, I've never met anyone who, I agree on a whole ton of stuff. I always have disagreements with people on major things. So I was like, okay with that. And I love having those conversations with people who disagree with me, because I think that's how we get somewhere with our knowledge base. And so, and I'm good. I feel fine saying this, like, God forbid I have cancer. I don't plan on going to the doctor to fix the cancer. I'll try some other modalities, right? And this is my philosophy. If I die, I die. I'm gonna be in heaven. It's gonna be way better. So I'm good with that. That's my personal belief. That's not to say nobody should use doctors and go to doctors. I think doctors can be useful, and all that. But that's to say, that was my philosophy, right? Didn't go to doctors growing up. Didn't believe in them for my personal health. I think that there is a lot of harm in the medical establishment. I mean, the third leading cause of death is medical malpractice, right? That's the third leading cause of death in the United States, which is funny. I remember distinctly in my AP bio class in high school. I think we were learning about the heart, or maybe it was in my anatomy class. We were learning about the heart. And, the professor puts all the leading causes of death, and like number 1, cardiovascular disease, number 2, cancer, number 3, whatever number 3 was. it didn't have medical malpractice in there, which is funny when you have all these charts and they don't even include it. But then you can look it up, obviously, and it'll tell you. But anyways, so I was that sort of thinking more about that was helping me with being okay with not being able to go to med school. And so that was sort of that framework there in what happened. And yeah, so 3 months quit. And right now, sort of in between two things, and one that is research, going like PhD track and potentially becoming like a professor and doing research. And then the other one is chiropractic. Why I'm here today with you, being at Palmer yesterday was really cool, seeing some classes, and it was cool to see that dynamic and all that in the community there, and the mindset people have is much different than the standard medical establishment. Still, there's room for improvement there, but much better than what you'll learn in the standard medical establishment and at least the people you'll be around in the standard medical establishment. And I think it's really important to be around like-minded people. There's obviously a time and place to talk with people who you disagree with. That's not to say, avoid them at all costs, still be around those people. But I think it is something to think about of like, all right, I'm going to be in this for 3-4 years, whatever that may be. And, I don't want to feel like the odd man out, that's never like a really great feeling. You want to at least have some people who you can talk to, your different ideas about, which I think, chiropractic offers. So yeah, right now, I definitely will say I'm leaning towards chiropractic. But who knows? What's great about this is, I don't have to make the decision right now. Whereas with med school, it's like now or never. So yeah, that's a little bit about why I quit and the reasoning behind it.
Yeah, that's an interesting existential situation because it represents like a true barrier. I think that we have mental barriers in regards to things that we feel called to do, but then we always have a reason why we don't think we can do it.
Yeah.
But you representing the innate intelligence of the body, you, by your morals, you cannot get these vaccines to go to school. It's just who you are.
Yeah.
I totally respect that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I love that. I know that whatever you pursue, you will be incredibly successful in. And I deeply admire your passion, and I sense it right away. I mean, right when I met you, I could tell. I mean, I see it in your eyes, the fire and the desire you have to share what we believe to be the truth, which we were just talking about this morning. Like, I have the truth, I'm going to share it with everybody. It's like you always have your best approximation of what you believe to be the truth, and that is what you're talking about in regards to being around people who you disagree with. That's the whole purpose of philosophy, to admit things that you don't know and things you feel very confident in, and to build from there. Yeah,
exactly. And like even on like the vaccine topic, like I talk to my friends about vaccines all the time, people who disagree with me on my position about it, and I disagree with them on their position about it, and that's totally okay. And I think we really, as a society, need to be okay with talking to people about topics that we both disagree about, because that's the only way we will move forward, and the only way that we'll be exposed. Like, we should be exposed to other ideas that are different than ours. Like, I think that is a healthy thing, and I think a lot of people will not want that. They won't want to be around, they won't want to have those conversations. They want to sort of push those conversations to a side, or like act like you don't, let's say for me, like act like I don't have these beliefs around vaccines. Like, no, I should share the things
because that's
I'm not,
who you are.
Exactly. And I'm not going around telling everybody else, but if the conversation comes up, it comes up, and it's a good conversation to have. And that goes for any topic, not just vaccines. So I think that's like an important part. And like you said, it's like standing my ground. Like my belief is like, I'm not going to inject that into my body. So I'm not going to, turn that over just because they want me to get it to go into their establishment. It's not something that I personally want to do. So yeah, it's definitely was, took some courage, but also, growing up in that environment, like I think I say this a lot, like also when I have this conversation about vaccines to my friends, it's like, all right, I ask them like, all right, why do you get vaccines? And a lot of the times, this is more of a general statement, I don't want to speak for everybody, but a lot of times their answer is like, well, that's just like what I do. Like, my mom tells me to get vaccines, and that's what they do. And that's okay. That's really how it was for me for most of my life. It's like, the reason I don't get vaccines is because that's just what we did. We didn't get vaccines. It wasn't even something I'd ever really thought about growing up. Now, 4 years ago, when I started diving deep into the literature, I did start diving deep into the literature around vaccines, trying to have a better understanding, better backing on why I had this opinion. And so I think that's always important to have. Like, you should not just aimlessly like believe things, right?
Right.
And I always say, I could be wrong about vaccines. You could also be wrong about
I love
vaccines.
that.
So I think that's sort of the approach to have.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think what it comes down to is, as opposed to wrestling with the literature and specific topics, I think as a human being, philosophically, your obligation is to take the time to figure out what your fundamental premises are. What do you truly believe? And so people that are pro-vaccine and anti-vaccine, this is a great example of a philosophical debate, because they ultimately just have two different fundamental premises.
Yeah.
One will believe the body is this machine that always needs fixed, and without us intervening, it's just going to go into shambles and fail and rot away.
Yeah.
Whereas people like us, we believe the body has the capacity to not only prevent disease, but create health and vitality when given the right conditions.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Next question. So what is more important, our diet or our light exposure?
I love this question. All right, let's see. Where should we start here? So, okay, let's start with this. I think diet's important. Okay, I think diet's very important. I will say this though. This is where I sort of stand at the moment. I think once you get to because everyone can debate about diets here and there, and like you and I probably disagree on the best diet, and that's okay.
And that's okay.
I think we can, we can have that debate, and that debate's been going on forever, and I don't think it's going to end. I think once you get to whole foods and like clean whole food diet, once you're at that point, I really do believe diet is probably a much less significant factor in health than most people think. Now, for the person who's eating McDonald's every single day, I think it's probably super important for them to just get to that whole food point. However, we obviously know, that light is interacting with our body to help our body utilize the food that we are eating. So let's start with, because this is probably the most famous study around this, with Glenn Jeffrey's red light study. So Glenn Jeffrey, researcher at a University College London, what he did, he took 30 participants, brought them to the lab, had a control group, an experimental group, and in the experimental group, what he did is he had both groups take a oral glucose tolerance test. So they drank a huge gulp of glucose, not something recommend people to do. It's probably not great to just take a ton of glucose. It doesn't taste great either. Huge gulp of glucose, and what he does is he monitors their glucose over time. So every 15 minutes, he measures their glucose via a little finger prick, and he's measuring their glucose for the next 2 hours every single 15 minutes. He did that for both the experimental and the control group. In the experimental group, the only change that he did, the only intervention that he did, was he shined 670 nanometer red light on 4% of the total body surface of these participants. So on their back, 4% of their total body surface, like that small, super small area, for 15-minute exposure to this red light. And then again, he's monitoring their glucose. And what he found is that the people who got exposed to the red light, same food, same glucose that both groups were consuming, but the group who got the red light shine on them had a 27.7% reduction in glucose. And then there was like a 7.5 reduction in the peak of the glucose spike, and area under the curve was reduced. So huge, reductions in blood glucose. Glucose regulation is better simply by shining red light on a small portion 4%. Of these 4% of the total body surface.
4% of the total surface.
Very, very small. And so, okay, let's just look at that study alone, right? Clearly, the light is having an effect. This is a randomized placebo-controlled trial. The people didn't know if they were getting the red light shine on them or not. Now, one other really interesting thing about the study is that Glenn also monitored their CO2 output. So we'll talk about mitochondrial biology here in a sec, but when our mitochondria are utilizing glucose and taking glucose to transform energy within the mitochondria, that whole process also produces CO2. So when we breathe in, we're breathing in oxygen. The point of breathing in oxygen is to get that oxygen to our mitochondria, electron transport chain, acting as that terminal electron acceptor, accepting that electron, creating water. deuterium depleted water, and energy. Yep. ATP. Yep. There you go. And yeah, forming ATP and all that. But that, so we breathe in that oxygen for that purpose and that purpose alone. That's why we need to breathe in oxygen. At the same time, when we breathe out, we're breathing out CO2 again because of cellular respiration, this energy transformation process within the body. And so when we breathe out CO2, that's an indicator that our mitochondria are functioning, right? Without the mitochondria and stuff, and without cellular respiration, we're not breathing out CO2. So if our mitochondria function, at an increased rate, at increased capacity, well, we're going to also be breathing out more CO2. So he also measured CO2 output of both groups, and he saw that the people who got the red light shine on them also had an increased amount of CO2 output. So this is an indicator that of the mechanism at play. And so the proposed mechanism there is that red light gets absorbed by our mitochondria. So there's a few, components here. I'll just talk about the one that they mentioned in the study. We can talk about some other components later. Cytochrome C oxidase, which is the fourth protein complex on the electron transport chain. You basically have these protein complexes on this chain that electrons funnel through. At the very end of the last protein complex, the fifth protein complex, ATP synthase, is this little motor. It's quite literally a motor. At the end of it, it's this little rotor that spins super, super fast. It's the most efficient motor.
Like 9,000 rounds per.
Yeah, it's insane.
Per minute or per second?
I don't know the exact, but
yeah, I think if it's per second, I wouldn't be surprised. I've heard it's just this incredible machine.
Exactly, incredible machine.
I'll say machine, but it's much more than that. It's life.
It's life. Yeah. It runs at almost 100% efficiency. No human has ever created a motor that efficient. So the body is way better than anything.
We could try for millions of years.
Yeah, we're never going to be able to get there. But anyways, their proposed mechanism is cytochrome C oxidase absorbs the red light. What happens is then it releases nitric oxide, and nitric oxide, when it's bound to cytochrome C oxidase, is a barrier for oxygen to come into cytochrome C oxidase. So if we can take nitric oxide out, oxygen can come in. That allows more protons to get pumped up, creating a higher charge gradient, so more positive charge on the outside, more negative charge in the inner mitochondria and the matrix of the mitochondria, creating this charge gradient, charging your mitochondria like batteries. More protons on top allow for more, basically like a waterfall of protons to come down.
The
ATP
protons
synthase
get pumped up and then back down at the end.
Exactly, come down. ATP synthase. ATP synthase moves as the protons come through it, creating ATP. And so that's one proposed mechanism. So we're basically, red light gets absorbed. We're creating more ATP, more cellular energy. Well, we can talk about that.
Yeah.
And then the other sort of hypothesis here is that this red light can also be absorbed by the nanowater around ATP synthase. So around this rotor that spins fast is this, this hypothesis. We don't have too much mechanistic evidence around this, and Gerald Pollack's work probably has a factor in here as well. But the idea is that the water around the rotor of ATP synthase is very viscous. If we can reduce the viscosity of that water, the rotor can spin faster. If the rotor can spin faster, we can produce more ATP, produce more ATP, more cellular
totally
energy.
Plausible mechanism. Totally plausible hypothesis.
Sure. Exactly. So those are the two like mainstream mechanisms at play here. So, but anyways, this gets to this idea that this red light is having an effect on how our mitochondria are utilizing glucose, utilizing the food that we are consuming. So prior to this human study, Glenn Jeffrey and Mike Pauner, one of his colleagues, they did this study on bees. So this is actually Mike Pauner's bees. Yeah, this is Mike Pauner's idea to shine the. So Glenn tells a story. They're like in their car driving somewhere, and they were they had tons of evidence showing that when you shine red light on mitochondria, these mitochondria work harder, and they are transforming more energy, more electrons are funneling through, more protons, higher charge gradient within the mitochondria. So they had all this mechanistic cell culture and mitochondrial culture studies, and they're thinking like, well, if we shine red light on people, well then their blood glucose should also lower. Just makes sense with the mechanistic studies that they had. And so Glenn was like, interesting idea. Well, let's not do humans first. Let's do the bees first. So they actually started it on bees. I haven't
heard of the study on bees.
Yeah, so they had a bee experiment. Same exact thing. They forced these bees to drink glucose. The bees drink the glucose. Their glucose spikes. They can do the same thing. It's an oral glucose tolerance test. What they do is the antennae of the bee. They take an antennae out. Antennae, I don't know. And they push their thumb on it, a little squirt of blood. It's not actually blood, it's hemolymph, I think. But same same thing as blood for humans. They a little bit comes out. They can test the glucose levels in there. And same thing. He shined red light. He also shined blue light on these bees. So there was 3 groups. There was a red light group, a blue light group, and a control group. What he sees when he shines the red light, reductions in blood glucose. With the bees, it was like significant. I don't know the exact number, but I think it was like a 40 or 50% reduction in blood glucose compared to controls. When he shined the blue light, there was an increase in blood glucose compared to controls. When Glenn was thinking about this to transforming this to humans, he saw it as unethical to shine the blue light on the humans, which is why the human study only had the red light group, which is really interesting because when we think about human environment, the modern human environment, well, we are surrounded by blue light indoors. So we are the human experiment, right? Glenn didn't do the human experiment because he saw it as unethical, but the government and everyone else thinks it's ethical to shine the blue light
across the entire world.
Across the entire world, yeah, exactly. So that's a funny thing there. And the reason why they saw an increase in blood glucose with the blue light exposed bees is because within all the protein complexes on the electron transport chain, there's these porphyrin rings. So these large rings, and there's different porphyrin rings, and some of the porphyrin rings absorb heavily blue light. So they have a peak absorption in the blue. And when some of these porphyrin rings, I think it's like protein complex 1, 3, and 4 maybe, I don't know, certain protein complexes, when they absorb the blue light, they create reactive oxygen species. So you have these oxygen molecules in the mitochondria, and when the porphyrin ring absorbs the blue light, it turns the oxygen molecule into a reactive oxygen species. When we have too much reactive oxygen species within the cell, that can cause direct DNA damage. It can cause mitochondrial DNA damage. It can also just act as a stressor to the cell, more oxidative stress within the mitochondria, within the cell. Now, reactive oxygen species alone aren't necessarily this bad thing. They are actually required for our body to communicate. So our body uses ROS, reactive oxygen species, as a cellular communication device.
Isn't it because they have a magnetic field?
Yeah, they definitely do. I don't know how much. I haven't looked at the research behind that, but possibility for sure. And so that's you have more stress within the mitochondria. The mitochondria can't utilize the glucose as well. That's why you're seeing an increased blood glucose, because the mitochondria aren't taking up that glucose. It's staying in the bloodstream. So the bees had higher blood glucose when you shine the blue light. Now, I bet if we shine that blue light on these humans, we would probably see a similar thing. We'd probably see an increase in blood glucose, but that never happened. But this just goes to the story around how light affects the mitochondria and how that will affect how our mitochondria utilize glucose, utilize food. So if let's think about this from a primordial state, right? The human body expects full spectrum sunlight, right? We are supposed to be in full spectrum sunlight 24/7. There shouldn't be a single second in our day when we're not exposed to full spectrum sunlight. Now, this doesn't mean direct sunlight all day long, right? We would have had a ton of trees, been around green shade, been in sunlight, probably direct sunlight periodically throughout the day, and all of that.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing to interrupt. Sorry for a second.
Yeah, you're good.
The thing is you are making a positive claim that we are designed to be in full spectrum sunlight. Somebody may push back on you and say, "What's your evidence?" For that, and what would you say to that?
Yeah, this is great. So I'll give a few pieces of evidence. My piece of evidence: the Bible tells us the creation story. Adam and Eve were placed in the Garden of Eden. There were no buildings, right? There were no buildings there. It was all greenery, trees, and all of that. That's the only evidence I need. Now, if we think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, well, the same thing, right? We would have evolved, same exact thing. We would have evolved out of Africa. We actually think the Garden of Eden is probably somewhere near Africa.
East African drift.
Yeah. And so we would have evolved somewhere out of Africa. Again, no buildings, nothing. We would have been outdoors 24/7. And even as we drifted out of Africa and we moved out of Africa, we would have still been outside 24/7. Once humans started building buildings and things like that. But even once we started building homes and things like that, there was still there were no glass windows to start with. So we would have had openings where infrared light is funneling through, and even UV. There's no shade for UV. You can be under complete shade, and your body is still getting small amounts of UV light because of how the scattering works. So there's no shade for UV as well. So you would have been exposed to full spectrum sunlight 24/7.
And a ton of infrared.
And a ton of infrared
permeates everything.
Exactly. And so, yeah, that's my evidence for that positive claim there. But yeah, so thinking about this from a primordial standpoint, would have been outside 24/7. So our body expects this full spectrum sunlight all the time. It's going to use that signal to propagate, and it's going to utilize that for many different cellular processes, including how our body utilizes food. We would have always been eating food while exposed to full spectrum sunlight. And this gets to this idea of like signal coupling, right? We would have, whenever we were eating food, we would have been outside, probably, grounded to the earth, getting direct sunlight, breathing in fresh air, and all these things. So there's a bunch of different signals.
With our family?
With our tribe, with our family, probably laughing, conversating, all this stuff, right? So all of these signals are having a play. I bet 100% the air we breathe has an effect on how our body utilizes glucose. No doubt about it. Mm-hmm. Because again, looking at it from this primordial standpoint, our body expects it. It's a signal that our body expects. It's a signal that our body is going to utilize to do the things that it does. So that's sort of like that idea there. There's a couple other studies that we could talk about. There was a study, small study published a few years back, where what they did is that they actually took people to actually go outside and sunbathe. They took their fasting blood glucose before the study began, and they took their fasting blood glucose 7 days after. It's raining on us. Rain. Let's see. I think we're good. What do you think?
I think we're good. Right when I say that.
Okay. All right. I think we're chilling.
Here we are again. We had a bit of a rain break. You were referring to a study.
Yes. There was a study that was published where they basically took a group of participants and they tested their blood glucose prior to the experiment, fasting blood glucose. And then for 7 days, they had these participants lay outside with not a whole ton of skin exposed. So it was just, it was arms and like legs. So they were wearing like shorts and a t-shirt. For 7 days, just in the morning hours. So it was from 9 a.m. to 9:10 a.m. 10 minutes of sun exposure, 7 days, tested their blood glucose, fasting blood glucose prior to the study, and then at the end of the study. And at the end of the study, their fasting blood glucose dropped around 30%. And this is simply just by laying outside in full spectrum sunlight, 10 minutes for 7 days. And so that's another fasting study.
And that's their fasting blood glucose. So for the layman, what are the implications of that?
Yeah.
How would you explain that?
Yeah, exactly. So this is fasting blood glucose. So compared to what Glenn was doing in his experiment, he was doing an oral glucose tolerance test. So that was they're drinking glucose and testing blood glucose over time. So that's your response to your glucose response to food. Whereas this is just what is your glucose response when you're not eating food, and what does your blood glucose look like when you're not eating food? And so the implication of that is like essentially like, all right, how are your mitochondria working when you're not actually putting food into the body? So your mitochondrial function sort of at a more or less like a baseline compared to when you're consuming that glucose and it has to like take up that glucose. So two different like sort of experiments there. And so that's another really fascinating one, right? Less controlled, more of like it was a less controlled experiment because they're just outside sunbathing. They're not controlling their food intake throughout the day and all those things. Now they did control for other factors like age and race, and I think they did control for diet to an extent via questionnaires and things like that. But another fascinating study that aligns with what Glenn found. There was another paper published this year on rats looking at type 2 diabetic rat models, shining, I believe it was red and infrared light. I don't know the exact nanometers, but I think it was like 1,000 nanometer near infrared and specific nanometer of red. Shine it on these diabetic rat models. Saw the exact same thing. Blood glucose also got reduced. This is also fasting blood glucose. Fasting blood glucose reduced in the group that got the red and infrared light shined on them. So those are 3 really great studies, just looking at from a mitochondrial standpoint on how these light wavelengths interact with the mitochondria and are affecting how our body is consuming glucose. There's also a circadian component, right? So not only are we getting, when we're outside in full spectrum daylight, not only are we getting these wavelengths of light stimulating our mitochondria, but we're also getting this light entering into our eyes, right? So from a circadian perspective, bright light blue light stimulates melanopsin, this pigment in these intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells in our eyes, in the retina, stimulates those cells, which sends a signal to our suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is basically the central timekeeper of our body. I think of it as like a Big Ben, right? So it's this tall, big clock that, you're in London and you're walking around London, no matter where you are, you can see Big Ben, you can see the time, just like that's exactly how our suprachiasmatic nucleus is. It is this central clock that all of our cells can basically see and know what time it is based off of that clock. Right? So if that clock is misaligned, well, then all these other bodily processes are going to be sort of shifted and misaligned and have downstream consequences, because the circadian clock, the central circadian clock, governs every single cell, every single organ of the body.
And you can look at the suprachiasmatic nucleus as almost like the conductor of our biological symphony. So without the conductor, everybody has their instrument, but they don't know when to play, how to play, when not to play.
Exactly. It's a great analogy. Now, from a circadian perspective, the way that glucose metabolism works is also under circadian control. So there's different genes that control this and all these other things. And so if we're getting the right light into the eyes, that's also going to affect how our body's utilizing glucose as well. There's a beautiful published this year, 2026, earlier this year, in Cell Metabolism, one of the most prestigious journals in the world. And when we're looking at metabolism studies, it's the best journal out there to get this published in. It took type 2 diabetics. It was a crossover study, so there was no quote unquote control group. They were their own control group. So these participants went in to this controlled lab, and what they did is that they worked in an LED and fluorescent lit environment. So no windows, nothing, for 4 days, and then they took a little break. I think it was like a week break, and then they came back into the lab and worked just in a different environment. The other environment was had big windows on both sides of their work desk, and they were in the environment all day long for 4 days, four consecutive days. And so what they did is that they were looking at glucose. So they had a continuous glucose monitor on these type 2 diabetics. The food was exactly the same. For all 4 days, they fed these people the same exact food. Exercise was the same. So food, exercise, even their environment at night. So there was no bathroom in where they were sleeping. So they had to, leave the room and exit, still in the lab, where the lab had bright light and stuff like that. They even had these participants wear amber blue blockers at night. So it was a super, super controlled, tightly controlled experiment, where really the only variable at play here is the light that these people were exposed to. Now, when we're looking at what this light was, right? It's this standard LED, non-dynamic lighting. So with the LED lights, it's the same color temperature all day long. It's the same brightness all day long. It's the same wavelength all day long. So nothing's changing in that environment. Whereas when you are sitting in front of the window, you're having this dynamic lighting. So throughout the day, they're getting, the shifts in the lighting from the sun. Now, they're not getting full spectrum sunlight, because we know that windows block a lot of the wavelengths of light, but they're still getting that circadian stimulus into their eyes. So these people also were getting exposed to more longer wavelengths of light, although it was greatly reduced because of the window, but that was probably a component. But they were looking at different outcomes, right? So they actually took muscle biopsies of these type 2 diabetics. So that's basically, going into, I think it was the thigh, you take a little incision, take a little part of their muscle out to test their muscle clock genes. So they saw that the people that when they were exposed, that when they were in the window environment, the window work environment, their circadian rhythm of their muscle cells were more aligned. And what that leads us to believe is that, okay, well, they were exposed to this dynamic lighting, their central circadian timekeeper was more aligned, meaning that their peripheral clocks and their cells throughout the body, including their muscle cells, were also more aligned, because they were getting that stimulus from the suprachiasmatic nucleus, setting all the peripheral clocks and all of the other clocks in all of our cells, which then led to better glucose metabolism. So these participants, when they were exposed to the window lighting, when they were sitting in front of the window, they had better time in normal glucose range. So basically with these type 2 diabetics, we want them to be in a certain range of glucose throughout the day. They had increased amount of time in that normal glucose range. There was better glucose homeostasis. So, the control of glucose throughout the body throughout the day. Now, what was interesting, the primary outcome that they were looking for was glucose spikes and that rise in glucose after a meal and things like that. That outcome was not significant. So there was there wasn't a statistically significant difference between the environments. Now, my hypothesis there is that they didn't go far enough, and that far enough would be getting those people outside. right? Because then you would, one, be still getting the circadian stimulus, but you'd be getting all those wavelengths, so this long wavelength light that would be stimulating their mitochondria, which they weren't getting a whole ton about when they were in front of the window. So I think if they brought these participants outside, we would have seen even greater improvements, but needless to say, we still saw some great improvements with just sitting in front of a window on how the body was utilizing the food. Same food, but the body was utilizing the food differently because of the light it was exposed to. So those are sort of like the three things that I think about there. And even, so going back to that sunbathing study, the authors propose, I don't like what they proposed here because I don't think it's too accurate, but and I reached out to the authors, I never got a response back. But I forget the country they were in. It wasn't the United States, but I reached out to the authors because their proposed mechanism was vitamin D, because we know that vitamin D has a play in how glucose is utilized within the body. So they proposed, all right, these people were getting sun exposure, they were getting increased levels of vitamin D. They did not test for vitamin D. Now, if they tested for vitamin D and they saw an increased level of vitamin D, well, then we could say, okay, potentially that is probably the mechanism. But think about this. It was from 9 a.m. to 9:10 a.m. I would have to look at the exact.
You mean 9:10 p.m.?
Sorry, a.m. No. It was 9 a.m. to 9:10 a.m. that they were getting the sun exposure. So only 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Exactly, 10 minutes of sun exposure. That's it. But during that time period, there probably isn't any UVB available for these people to produce vitamin D in the first place. So I think
which is a whole other conversation.
Yeah. And I think I think the author's conclusion is probably not accurate, but I think it's probably the long wavelengths of light. So these people were getting the long wavelengths of light, same with the mitochondria. So those are sort of the things, the studies that come to mind when I think about how our body utilizes food and how that is different when we're exposed to different lighting. So I mean, this gets to the idea of, we want to eat outdoors, right? And we now have the studies to back this up. I'll say one more study that is not published yet. It's by Glenn Jeffrey and his team out of University College London. He actually has a PhD architect working on this study, because what's really fascinating is, now the architects are really getting into this, the effects of these long wavelength light on humans, because they know that in the indoor environments that they have built forever has no long wavelengths of light. So they're actually becoming concerned because they're like I'm affecting these people's health because we're not thinking about the lighting in the building. We're thinking about the lighting, but we're not thinking about it from a health standpoint. We're thinking about it from an energy efficient standpoint. We're thinking about it from how bright can we get the indoor environment with the least amount of energy. That's the standpoint that most architects are thinking about. But more and more architects are coming to this conclusion now, working with Glenn Jeffrey on how can we make it the healthiest possible for the human. And so, anyways, there's this paper that it should be published by the end of this year, hopefully, where super fascinating. These people in the paper, one of the figures they have a picture of where these people were working. They took these participants working in a building where it was a small little cubicle type room, super small room, not a whole ton to walk around, just table and a desk and a computer and stuff. Big LED sort of overhead light, and then they had a little lamp on their desk, and the lamp had an LED bulb as well. They, had two groups. They had the control, where that was the environment, then the experimental. What they did in the experimental, they took their LED from their light bulb on their desk. They took apart the LED. They put, so this is just standard, typical LEDs. Probably huge spike in the blue. Actually, they have a figure of it. So there's a huge spike in the blue, very little amounts of red, green as well. But
it's what the sun emits.
Exactly. Yeah. So they took that LED apart. They placed a single 850 nanometer LED into that device. So 850 nanometers is near infrared, right? So this is one part of what we get from full spectrum sunlight. So full spectrum sunlight does have 850 nanometers. It also has all the other wavelengths of red and infrared.
Might as well grab it.
I think this is gonna be the last one though, of the rain.
Yeah. Okay, so they switched the pure blue light bulb in for just a spike in 850 nanometer light.
Exactly.
And what are the results?
Yeah, so they did this for a few days. Then these participants, they told them, you do your normal thing, normal day-to-day life. They were working their, normal 9-to-5 job. But all they changed, they add a single 850. And the people who had the 850 nanometer into their device, one single LED, they had better glucose regulation over time via looking at that oral glucose tolerance, via looking at that continuous glucose monitor, and they had a reduction reductions, significant reductions in the oral glucose tolerance test. So the total blood glucose after a blood glucose spike was reduced as well, which is pretty crazy. And they did this before, they did that oral glucose tolerance test before and after, comparing those two. So before they started the 850 nanometers and after for the 4 days after they had that 850 nanometers for 4 days, reduction in blood glucose that way, reductions in glucose regulation throughout the day. So these people were utilizing glucose much better by a very small amount of 850 nanometers into an already LED lit, tons of blue light enriched, isolated blue light enriched environment, which is crazy that that small amount of infrared can have that impact. And now when we just think about this logically, if that small amount of infrared is having that impact, imagine the impact that you would have if you're eating outdoors. So I hope someone does this study. This is the thing with science, right? It's like we need to isolate super small variables. We need to have it in a super controlled environment so we can, really see the results. But no study tells you what is happening, because we're isolating these results and, again, having these signals come at it at single signals. When in nature, our primordial state is a continuous amount of different signals all happening at the exact same time. Our body's receiving all that information, receiving all the signals at the exact same time. The signals are coupling, the signals are coming together to create this one coherent sort of signal, I would say. And that one coherent signal, which is the combination of all the signals, is what is your environment. So all these studies that we have isn't really giving us much information about the environment, but I think it is good to sort of have these studies, because then we can sort of deduce and infer what would be happening with the environment. And I think, that's sort of the flaw in science, is that we're too sort of dogmatic of this. We need these placebo-controlled trials, but really, I bet if we had that study where we brought people outside, the reason that study isn't happening, at least right now, is because you have all those other variables and they want to isolate that variable. So you have, what's the effect of the brightness of light? What's the effect of the air that the person breathing? What's the effect of them looking long distance into, greenery? So there's all that other stuff that they're like, we're never going to don't know if it's the sunlight. But that doesn't matter, because in nature, it's not just the sunlight. It's all these other things.
It's not a signal that you isolate, it's the signal.
Exactly.
It just popped in my brain. I love that, because your podcast is called The Signal.
Yeah, exactly.
And your newsletter and everything that you write about. I will say, I deeply admire your ability to retrieve all of these facts and how they conduct all these different studies. It really shines light on your passion for these subjects. I really think that your ability to retrieve information is congruent to your passion in something. So it's exuberating from your being. So my question then is, from all of this complex science, what is the takeaway? For me, I think the conclusion is health goes so much far beyond the food coming in, and you can almost look at it as a means of the body being basically, I hate to say it again, but a machine. There's fuel for your body in the form of food, but hyperfixating on the fuel is a problem, because what really matters, if you look at the body like a car, the engine is what matters the most. And that means your mitochondria. And then your ability to convert the fuel into energy is scientifically going to be your mitochondrial function. And then what determines your mitochondrial function is your environment.
Exactly.
So to answer the question, it was a very deep question. What is more important? What would your answer be if you could reduce it to one sentence? And then from there, amidst all the complexity, for the layman, what are the action steps? What do you do?
So I think first, before we get to what you do, all right, the environment, which is the coupled signals all together, and one of those signals is the food we're eating, but it's the environment that matters the most. But we have to understand that the environment means all of the signals coming together at once. And I think that is how, again, that's what our body expects. Our body expects an environment, a coupled, all these signals coupled together, and that's what our body expects. So our body is designed expecting that. Now, our body's designed that way. If we don't give it that full environment of all the signals coming together at once, well, then it is going to either it's missing out on one of those components, or it's missing out on that coupled signal together. Because, let's take two signals, for example. If we have two signals, perhaps the combination of those signals coming together is greater than the sum of its parts, right? And it's like the beginning. It's like the environment, the sum of the signals, the whole is better than the sum of its parts. And we see that time and time again. Yeah. So I think that's a really key distinction here. Practical takeaways, I mean, it's get outside. Like, that's such an easy one. Again, the primordial state is for us to be outside. So the takeaway is get outside. That can look like a lot of different things. So for instance, if you are up north and it's like winter, getting outside, maybe, all right, you have a coat on it and things like that, and you're bundled up, but that's okay because these long wavelengths of light can penetrate all the way through clothing. So we have peer-reviewed published literature out of University College London showing that not only does near-infrared light penetrate completely through the human thorax and the human hand and all this, it penetrates through all tissue, but it also can penetrate up to 6 layers of clothing, which is also amazing, right? So we can still be bundled up in winter and be receiving those longer wavelengths of near-infrared light.
That will improve mitochondrial function, therefore metabolism, and therefore reduce the weight gain that a lot of people get in the winter months.
Exactly, 100%. And so it can look like that. It can look like sitting in direct sunlight. It can look like sitting underneath a tree and eating your lunch. So there's different ways that can look like, and I think all of those still align with that sort of primordial state. You're still outdoors. So I think that can look like a lot of different things. And if we want to take it another step further, all right, eat outside, eat grounded to the earth. That's another signal that our body's expecting when we're eating as well. So that's sort of just my mindset. It's like, we're never going to be able to get perfect to that sort of primordial state. Yeah. But we can get closer to it. And I always say, it's like that primordial state is like God's original design for us. And God's original design for us is that Eden, that Garden of Eden, that Edenic sort of scenery where we're grounded to the earth, we're getting full direct sunlight, we're getting fresh air and whole foods and all these things. And that primordial, that original design that God has for us is the best design for us, and it's the best environment that we should be in. So we're never going to be able to get to that original design, but we can get closer and closer to it. And it's these just small little steps: eating outdoors, grounded to the earth, all these little things that we can do to get closer to it. And once the sun sets, don't put on your overhead LEDs all the time. So I sort of think about it like this: like the very least you can do at night is like dim the overhead lights. Then the next step you can do is like turn all overhead lights off and just use lamps. Then the next thing you can do is like, all right, take that standard LED out of the lamp, put a circadian friendly LED in that lamp. The next step you can do is utilize a light that also has infrared. So that can be an incandescent bulb, ideally like an amber incandescent bulb, or that can be an LED that also contains infrared. Like Raw Optics has the Lumios that we have in there that has tons of near infrared light as well. So there's different levels to it that people can continue to get better and better.
But it's such a simple framework. Rise with the sun.
Exactly.
Get outside. Eat outside. Ground to the earth. Walk after your meals.
Yeah.
Ideally outside.
Yep. Exactly.
Sunsets, lights off, and get ready for bed. And do we really need studies for that? That's kind of the deeper question here. Yeah. Or is all of the science that we're doing, study by study, ultimately just going to lead us to the conclusion living according to nature is the best thing we can do?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, it's like we need, like there's this concept of like forest bathing, right? Where you go out into a forest and trees diffuse and produce what's called phytoncides. So these chemicals that are actually anti-cancer. They have immune regulatory effects and all these other things. And these trees, certain trees, emit this. And when you're in a forest, you're breathing those phytoncides into your nose, and it's getting all throughout your bloodstream and everything. But it's just funny that we need like a good study to prove that breathing in a forest is beneficial for you, right? But so how I think about like why I do what I do on like social media and sharing that. And I've thought about this more recently. I don't think I'm doing it to convince people who disagree with me. I think what's actually the greatest, and maybe there's some, hopefully I can convince some people who disagree with me, but I think the real benefit with like sharing, the science on social media is equipping people who maybe already have these beliefs, but don't maybe have the full like knowledge to like back those beliefs up. Because I think that's really important, right? If you have these conversations with people, and if an individual out there has a conversation with someone, well, they should, have some information in the back of their head that they can present to that person, right? So I think that's really what I think is so valuable valuable with like me sharing on social media and sort of trying to equip people who even, already have the belief like, yeah, it makes sense to eat outside. Well, why? So trying to share that with them, I think, is really important. And that just goes to the idea of like, that's our Western philosophy. Our Western mind is like, we need a science to back it up. And I think it's unfortunate. I wish we didn't live in that society. Although, science is great, and it has led us to so many different discoveries and things like that, which I think is really great. I mean, I think humans are innately have this innate drive to want to learn and to be curious and to want to learn more and more and more. And I think, we're now at this sort of scientific and like technological era where we can learn so much more. I think there's some faults with how much we can like learn, but I think it's really interesting nonetheless. So yeah, super like easy practical takeaways, right? And the one-liner is like, get outside.
Yeah. And then one more thing I'll add is a big thing. Work out in the sun.
Yeah.
And maybe touch on that.
Yeah.
Briefly.
Yeah. So there's a couple of components. So let's first look at like, all right, what's happening when we're working out in an indoor environment? So a few things. We know it's pretty well established that when we work out, we produce more mitochondria. So we're actually increasing the amount of mitochondria in like our muscle cells and things like that. Now here's the problem. When we are indoors, when we're indoors exposed to isolated blue light, right? We know that
most gyms are.
With most gyms are, exactly, and they're blasting right directly on you. That is affecting our mitochondria. I mean, we talked about that with the B study, but at a fundamental level, it is producing more reactive oxygen species within the mitochondria. So now we have, let me actually take a little step back here. Energy resistance principle, Martin Picard, Nourish Murugan, beautiful paper published in Cell this year. I think it's going to be the forefront of health, medicine, science in the future. We just need more people to read it. It's going to be in the textbooks, I guarantee it. Energy resistance principle basically states at a fundamental level there needs to be this Goldilocks zone of energy resistance, meaning that there's energy flow within the mitochondria through the electron transport chain. If we have too much energy resistance, that means that we're resisting those electrons to flow too much, well then electrons can't flow. If we have too little energy resistance, well then there is no tunneling and sort of sculpting of where that energy is flowing.
And what would that look like? Like hyperbaric oxygen?
Well, so
much oxygen.
So a couple things. So I guess let me put it to this workout example because I think that will be easy to understand. Too much reactive oxygen species can damage mitochondrial protein complexes. It can damage that electron flow. So it's sort of putting that barrier, that resistance to electron flowing. Another one could be like different toxins can actually be embedded within the electron transport chain. That can be sort of that barrier, and you can think of that as like an electron barrier, an energy resisting barrier. Too little energy flow can also be another thing, and that I don't know too many good examples that come off the top of my head for like too little energy flow, but I think like when we just think of that concept, so energy resistance shapes and sculpts where energy flows. So I kind of think about it like let's say there's a source of energy coming here, but it just goes everywhere. I can sort of take my hands, resist that energy, sculpt it down to this sort of little area,
like
and
a river.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's a dam.
Yep, exactly. And so that's sort of like how I think about it in my brain. But we want this Goldilocks zone of energy resistance. And when we think about working out indoors, we are producing more reactive oxygen species. Blue light, by absorbing our mitochondria, are creating too much energy resistance. Energy and electrons cannot flow down the electron transport chain efficient enough. And this sort of gets to the concept of, I'll talk one last mechanism, because I've talked about those two cytochrome C oxidase mechanism and the nanowater around ATP synthase with the longer wavelengths of light.
And the porphyrin rings.
The porphyrin rings would be more the blue side. You have the mechanism on the blue side,
right.
But the mechanisms on the red and infrared those two are the sort of standard ones. So the paper that's going to be published this year by Glenn Jeffrey, Bob Fosbury, Scott Zimmerman, and Roger Schweltz. Roger Schweltz, a quadruple board certified physician out of Loma Linda, California.
Those are the big guys. Those four.
Yep. Scott Zimmerman, an optics engineer. Bob Fosbury, an astrophysicist, and then Glenn Jeffrey, that wet lab researcher. So people in different silos coming together to come up with this new synthesis. This idea is well above my pay grade of my knowledge of like physics and everything. But I can tell you what I do know. So with Marcus theory. So Marcus, basically created the theory on like how electrons interact with photons, and basically what happens is this. So when we actually look at the electromagnetic spectrum, so the light spectrum, what emits from sunlight, but when we look at it, so you can measure it in milliwatts per centimeter squared. That gives you like the irradiance, the intensity of the light. You can also measure it in electron volts, so basically how many photons in per photon. So when we look at it from a per photon view, we see that the highest the greatest amount of photons within the sun is in that near infrared range. So when we actually look at the amount, the percentage of photons that impinge on the human body, 70% of the photons that impinge on the human body that come from the sun is in the near infrared range, and probably even more actually. But one photon of near infrared light has approximately around 0.75 electron volts of energy. So it has this, it has energy to it. When it interacts with our mitochondria, it allows electrons to flow more easily because of this. When an electron goes down the electron transport chain, it loses energy. So electrons they're at a high energy state at the first protein complex, and as it goes down the electron transport chain, it loses energy. When it needs to get to that next protein complex, there's an energy barrier there, so it needs energy to get to that next protein complex because it's losing energy along the way. And the exact amount of energy that it needs is almost, its relative amount, it's almost 0.75 electron volts,
wow,
which is the exact amount of energy that is contained within a near infrared photon. So
that's incredible.
This just goes to the idea of like, we're designed to be bathed in the near infrared light 24/7.
Yeah.
Our mitochondria,
and you would have never come to that conclusion if you looked at the body as the calories in, calories out.
Exactly.
Work out at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Yep. And we would have never gotten to that conclusion if it wasn't for these 4 people who are in their different silos: astrophysicist, medical doctor, wet lab researcher, optics engineer, lighting engineer.
Yeah.
They all come together to collaborate together, getting rid of their silos, getting rid of their dogma within their sort of specialty, right? Becoming sort of this generalist, taking ideas from each other, and coming up with this new theory. And even like, it was funny, like Glenn Jeffrey tells a story where Glenn is like talking to Bob Fowler and thinking like, oh, I wonder if like near infrared light like penetrates the body. And Bob's like, no, duh, it does. Like from an astrophysicist's point of view, like they know it does just with the physics of how light, long wavelength light works. And Glenn's like, no, people don't know this, Bob. It's like we need to get this like published. We need an experiment to get this published, and then people will know it.
Yeah.
And that's goes to like sort of how scientific dogma works. But anyways, all right. Getting back to energy resistance, because now we have that framework that when we actually shine near infrared light on the body from the sunlight or whatever, we are increasing energy flow, reducing energy resistance, getting back to that sort of Goldilocks zone of energy flow.
And when he says Goldilocks zone,
yeah,
you can describe the Goldilocks zone as basically this threshold on each side, to where if you're too little or too much, it completely disrupts the dynamic, and you have to be in this exact, I want to say, spectrum.
Yeah.
And if you're not, it cancels out the whole entire system.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like a biphasic response, it's called. So it's like if you see like a bell curve, basically, it's like too little, you're not getting that effect. Goldilocks zone, you're getting the prime, the apex of that effect, and then too much, not getting the effect or consequences.
So then to fit within this Goldilocks zone, you are saying the near infrared has to be present.
Exactly.
And if it's absent, which it is in indoor environments, indoor gyms, you're placing a stress on your mitochondria.
Exactly.
With the energy resistance principle, and then you're recruiting more mitochondria to be synthesized when you're building muscle. So then what are the effects of that downstream of decades of bodybuilding and weight training and not doing it in the sun?
So now what you have is you have so many mitochondria that aren't, and this is another thing about mitochondria. When we look at like a Bio 101 textbook, you see like the cell, the cell, and you have the nucleus and endoplasmic reticulum, and you're like one mitochondria there, and like that's how like they show it.
And there's a little mitochondria.
Yeah, and it makes sense. Like you can't draw all the exact what a cell exactly looks like, but when we actually look at the cell, one, that's not even how mitochondria look. Mitochondria are basically little spaghetti things, but and these mitochondria are beautiful because they move around, they interact with each other, and mitochondria have these cristae, right? So in the inner mitochondrial membrane, there's like folds in the inner mitochondrial membrane. Each fold, that's a cristae. When mitochondria align, and Martin Picard actually actually discovered this. Him and his team, they discovered it. When mitochondria align, when they come close to each other, they align their cristae. Their cristae align perfectly. So the cristae of this, basically, like it almost looks like it just like forms right into the other one.
Like a highway.
Like a highway. Yeah, exactly. Like imagine you have one highway. Cars can be driving on it. Imagine you just like split that highway. Well, now those cars can't go there. What these mitochondria do, when they come close to each other, that highway gets connected back together. So why is this happening? We don't know. What I maybe think is like, all right, maybe like, because that's where the electron transport chain is. So maybe the flow of energy is moving from one mitochondria to the other, and you have this sort of highway of mitochondria, a highway of energy flow throughout the body, throughout every cell. And I'm sure even, there's mitochondria interactions from one cell to the other. We now know that there's free mitochondria that float within our bloodstream. So now there's like mitochondrial testing where they can literally do a finger prick, test your mitochondria that are in your bloodstream. And this is like a new discovery thing.
We can do a whole episode on just the science of mitochondria and what they truly are doing, or what we think they can be doing based on the most recent research.
Exactly. So anyways, you're in this indoor environment, you're producing more mitochondria because you're working out, but you're producing more mitochondria in an environment that isn't adapted, the mitochondria are not adapted to. You're creating more energy resistance within the mitochondria. So now you have so many mitochondria that are like
outside of the Goldilocks zone.
Outside of the Goldilocks zone. Perfect way to put it. A lot of mitochondria outside of the Goldilocks zone, you're going to have downstream consequences because mitochondria are the foundation of how the cell functions. They're the foundation of how an organ functions. They're the foundation of how organs interact. They're the foundation of the entire human body.
And not to get dogmatic and fall back into like a form of hypocrisy and say the mitochondria are everything.
Yes.
We can go from the fundamental premise that is the body cannot do anything without energy.
Yeah.
And is it 90% of the body's energy that comes from the mitochondria?
Something like that, yeah.
So then we can deduce that our mitochondrial function is a fundamental pillar.
Yeah, I mean, and we were talking about like what's the difference between an alive person and a dead person. And Martin Picard, for people, they should go subscribe to like his Substack. It's brilliant. It's completely free. But he has a Substack, and he has an article talking about this. Like, what is the difference between an alive person and a dead person? The chemicals are exactly the same. So if we just take all the chemicals and we try to replicate that, we're not going to produce a human, right? Yeah. What does distinguish them, for sure, and there's probably more things, but definitely what does distinguish them is the energy flow. Energy stops flowing when an organism dies. And that is a distinguishing factor. And so I think it's a super important thing, right? And this gets back to this concept of like, all right, we have the greatest source of energy, the sun, interacting with another source of energy, and that interaction is going to have some effect.
And then I'll go off that. So that's, I think, what drew me into mitochondrial biology, quantum biology, was realizing there is so much more meaning to health than we are told. Because basically, if light is interacting with our body, and that is a driving force of what our cells do, light travels at how fast?
Fast. Yeah.
And it's traveling across the cosmos, and then the way it interacts with our body is in the form of the mitochondria. So then you could hypothesize the mitochondria is where the cosmos and human biology meet. And that is so profound. So then when, like you said, like it's simple in terms of the practical takeaways. When you're in the sun or when you're grounded to the earth, you think about that and you have that almost like it's like a reverence. And that in of itself, like the gratitude for knowing what light is doing to our body and knowing that I don't have to stress about how much I'm exercising and my glucose monitors all the time and what I'm eating and all these things. You just break it down to, am I respecting these, we could call them laws of nature? And I think that's such a more practical framework to go by.
Yeah, I think so. I just thought when you were saying that, one more thing popped into my mind, biophotons, and we don't need to get too deep.
Yeah, that's another
whole thing, right? So it's not only is there an interaction with the external light on our mitochondria, but our mitochondria, and there's some evidence that there's other parts of the cell that produce these, but our mitochondria, especially, from what we understand, is the mitochondria is the primary source of these biophotons.
And when it says biophotons, bio means life, photons are light particles. So the mitochondria quite literally emit their own wavelengths of light, and because light holds information, we could hypothesize that these biophotons are the primary form of information that our body uses to keep us coherent and conscious and able to interact and live.
Yep, I think, what is the book? Light in Shaping Life by Rowan Van Wyck. That's like number one. It's basically a textbook.
I know, I gotta get
about
that book.
how, oh, it's amazing.
I know you've read it.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so I think, people want to dive deeper into that. But there, again, there's another whole, we are producing light internally. If you look in, like, if the human eye could see biophotons, which it can't. Although, all right, wait, I want to talk about this for a little bit, because this is fun. Okay.
I got one more question.
Okay, if we put a little camera that can detect biophotons and we put it inside the body, it's not darkness in there, because our body is producing light, and it's also producing light from the UV all the way into the infrared.
And it's not secondary.
It's not secondary.
This is a key component of our physiology.
100%. And this is where it's like contested. It's like, all right, the anti-biophoton researchers are like, no, that's just like a secondary thing that happens when a chemical reaction occurs. Yeah. Whereas like Narosh Murugan and some of these other biophoton researchers are like, no. They sort of think it's like, no, that's probably the primary thing that's happening. And it's the secondary thing, maybe the chemical.
Yeah, and it can point to the question or the difficulty of consciousness. David Chalmers, what did he coin it? The hard problem of consciousness. How we can identify all these factors that encompass consciousness, but we can't actually break it down to how it's all working coherently and how everything works so fast. We think it's the chemical synapses in our brain with the neurons. It's like, it's so much faster than that.
Way faster.
And they have shown that with fascia and how fascia communicates faster than the nervous system. But then fascia, speaking in terms of like a highway, is basically, you could theorize the highway for these biophotons, especially considering collagen with Becker's research is a semiconductor, which is a fancy term for a material that conducts electricity under certain conditions. That's a whole nother rabbit hole.
So I think there's a lot of fun stuff around like biophoton, and I think that's going to be, I was talking about it to you yesterday, like Cameron Borg has a great article on his Substack, The Arrows of Chemistry. We have one molecule, an arrow, a new molecule. What is happening between that arrow? I haven't gotten a sufficient answer for me from my chemistry professors, but I await for a good answer. But we'll see.
So you're just 21 years old, and I'm just blown away by your wisdom. And like I said, your ability to like synthesize all these different topics and studies and just be so immersed in such a fascinating area of research. And I can see your passion, because really the implications are massive. It completely changes our understanding of ourselves and how we live and how we approach health and what health even is. Like, what is our definition of health? It will completely change once all these new findings are integrated into the textbooks, ideally, right? So one of my favorite quotes is from Carl Jung, and he said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you are. And when I talk with you and I talk about all these things with you, I can see, I feel like you are in the process of becoming who you are. And I feel like that's such an empowering philosophy, right? So for someone listening to this who feels called to do something philosophically, like that driving force of expression, of innate intelligence, what would you tell them if they feel called to do something, but there's somebody in their life or themselves telling them they're not worthy, or they have X, Y, and Z, and therefore they can't prioritize what they feel like they truly feel called to do? So in terms of becoming who you are, what advice would you give as a 21, extremely wise, knowledgeable 21-year-old?
Hopefully I'll gain some more wisdom as I keep growing. I think that's a really great question. First and foremost, I think the biggest thing is, one, we have this one life, right? And we want to, take advantage of it. And there's going to be outside voices and people that are going to say, you can't do these things. That's going to happen. I've experienced that. And so you're going to have these outside voices. You can't listen to them, right? If you have a drive and a passion and a desire to go after something and go do something, and you have this big vision, or whatever that may be, like anyone telling you otherwise that you cannot do something, you have to just, you have to sort of disregard that completely, I think. And that just goes, it's like negativity. I think anyone who just, propagates negativity, it's like, not that I can't be friends with them, but I don't want to be around that 24/7, you know? So like you want to surround yourself with like-minded people. You want to surround yourself with people who lift you up, that surround yourself with people who that believe in you as well and that want to help you with your mission and want to do it from a selfless perspective and a selfless sort of posture. And I think that's like the big thing. You know, like I have a ton of haters on social media as well, but you also, you know, with social media, you get a ton of, you know, fans and people who are aligned with you and all that, which is amazing. But yeah, there's the haters there. And for me, I know a lot of people probably struggle with like, especially in like the social media world, like struggle with the haters and things. It's like, I don't know, for me, I see it goes in one ear,
right
out
there,
the other.
what advice would you give to someone who feels that weight of someone criticizing them? I think there's something about having a passion and reminding yourself of the big goal and having that grand scale of a horizon that can overpower not only self-doubt but these outside voices, right? Yeah,
I think for me, the Bible for me is like the ultimate word of truth. And you know, everyone is a child of God and in creation, in one of His creation. And I think if we come in with that mindset, that is in itself is so empowering, because it's like, okay, who are you to tell me I'm not worthy, right? Who are you to tell me I can't do this thing, when it's like the creator of the entire universe, that not a single atom, not a single electron here on Earth, it would not be here if it wasn't for Him, right? The creator of the universe tells me that I am a child of Him, right? That He loves me and stuff. And I think that is so like incredible. And to me, it's like, I think we really need to like think about that, focus our attention on that, because, and that's the thing, right? It's like modern society and the powers that be want our attention so much. They pay a lot of money for our attention. You know, they create algorithms for our attention. They want our attention to be directed away from the creation and away from God and away from these things that truly matter, I believe, and towards their initiatives and their things, and that brings us into a conscious state of a lowered conscious state. It brings us into this area where we cannot sort of think clearly. I think this is why
we forget who we are.
We forget who we are. A child of God, exactly. And I think that's why the health message is so important, because I think the health message allows us to sort of break away from that sort of addiction of scrolling on social media and compulsion and all junk food and all that stuff. It gets us to break away from that and gets us to a clearer mind so that we can engage our attention onto the things that 100%. Matter.
And then you almost become receptive.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you are an antenna.
Yep.
And information that, like I said, you can call it the truth. Information that is backed by very profound evidence won't be received in the right way, because you are stuck in these habits that are keeping you in this lower conscious state, as opposed to focusing on these fundamental truths we can go by. The fact that you were made in the image of God, I think is really the best possible foundation you can build on, and to remind yourself of that every day and live your life from that perspective. I think that's the best thing we can do as humans.
I agree.
We understand that we are all together in this walk of life. Yeah. And community is everything. People that inspire you and want the best for you. Yeah. Extremely powerful.
And also one last thing I'll say is like, we also want to, those haters that you do have, like, love on them, right? Don't attack them as well, because that's never gonna help it.
Yeah, there's people that are aligned with who they are and are doing the things that they want to do. They will want the best for you. Yeah. And so ultimately that's just a projection of them judging you and all these things. It's just a reflection of them.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you have to put your foot down like you are doing and live from that place. So I love that. Great answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you everybody for watching. It's starting to rain again.
Yes.
But we got through it. We had some complications with the weather. But with that'll conclude the first episode of Innato Conversations. I look forward to more episodes and having incredible people like Jonathan on this podcast. And thank you for watching. Thank you,
Shay. Appreciate it.
Coming up from Del Rey and meeting me here.
Yep.
I look forward to future episodes. Thank you guys.
I'm excited for where this podcast is going to go. It's going to be amazing. You're great for your first podcast. You did a great job.
Thank you, brother.
Great job.
All right.
Yeah. Cool. Let's go, bro.
Let's go.
That was epic.